Welcome to The Fully Expressed Woman. I'm your host, Maeve Sundstrom. This special event has been lovingly handcrafted for you to reignite desire on your own terms, embody your pleasure, release shame, and embrace your birthright as a sexually clear and confident woman without feeling embarrassed or judged. Our amazing expert speakers and I are here to share with you our most powerful insights and practices to help you heal and freely connect with your sexuality so you can experience the full spectrum of joy, health, and creative expression that was always meant for you to have. I invite you to listen in on each one of these conversations so that you walk away from this event feeling resourced, informed, and empowered to take your own unique next steps toward your most joyful, authentic, and fulfilled sexual self. Check your email each morning for links to the interviews of the day. Any one of these conversations might just change your life, so be sure to tune in. We're so glad you're here. Hello, everybody, and welcome. Today, I have the joy and privilege of introducing you to Dr. Patty Britton. Dr. Patty is a clinical sexologist, a sexuality educator, and is known as the mother of sex coaching with top-level credentials. As a well-respected world leader in sexology, she is an academic, author, popular speaker, trainer, and workshop leader, and hosts over 40 DVDs for couples sexual enhancement. She's a frequent guest on summits, television shows, documentaries, live talk and news radio, podcasts and magazines such as Cosmopolitan, Men's Health and Women's Health. She has a private practice near Los Angeles and via Zoom globally. Dr. Patty is also the co-founder of Sex Coach U, the world's premier credentialing and training organization for sex coaching. Dr. Patty accepts VIP sex coaching clients, especially those referred by their therapist. Find her online at drpattybritton.com and www.sexcoachu.com. Dr. Patty Britton, thank you so much for being here today.
Thank you for having me. We're going to have such a great conversation. I can feel it.
We really are. I know we're just getting to know each other, but there's a fun energy. Yeah.
And there's synchronicity because the concept of really finding joy and pleasure and wellness around women's sexuality in particular is such an important topic, and it's always been the centerpiece of all my work as a sexologist. And I know we're going to be talking about birthing and pregnancy and postpartum and aging and all of that. So I'm really looking forward to this.
Well, wonderful. Me too. And let's just dive in because I know you have so much to share on all of these topics. And it feels like really our theme for the day is about, how sexuality and sex itself changes over the course of our lives. We go through different seasons and times. Our bodies change, our minds and hearts and spirits change, right? And our sexuality changes right along with it. So let's maybe lean into your specialty around sexuality and aging. I know that's something you've worked a lot with. Maybe you could share with us what's going on in that world.
Well, it's really interesting as you're talking about this journey that we as women, and when I talk about women, I'm really mostly referring to cisgendered women. We live in an era now where our pronouns matter and our self-ascribed identity matters, and it's a confusing world out there for a lot of people. And there's a journey which is maiden to mother to what we used to say as crone, and now many of us prefer to say as wise woman.
Yes.
And there's so many changes that we go through in our bodies, but it's not just our bodies, it's our spirit, it's our mentality, it's our worldview, it's our experiences, it's what we bring to this and what those experiences infuse in us as we evolve. And I think that so much of the news about aging, about becoming a senior, a word I particularly hate, almost as much as I hate crone, although I do think we need to reclaim crone.
Mhm.
But there's just something about how the masses will say, those of you who are listening may be smarter than the masses, but the truth is that there's a lot of mythology about aging, and that as we age, I say there are three bad things that happen. We slow down, we dry up, and we droop.
Mm,
And it's true.
mm,
The
mm,
breasts aren't sticking out, they're hanging down. The vagina in particular is dry if we're not supplementing. And we're slowing down because our orgasmic response, even our libidinous or desire
mhm.
activity is slower. We're much more in a trap, and I'm thinking of women, but this is true for males as well. They have their other issues, such as
Mm,
erectile challenges. And the good news for males is that they the number one issue for men, and this was obviously scientifically derived, is really early or rapid ejaculation. That
mhm.
is coming too quickly, and as men age, they tend to experience a delayed orgasmic response and delayed ejaculation. So that's in a way the good news, because they can last longer, but then they have erectile challenges, so they're not
Right.
lasting longer. So all that is
Right.
going on for heterosexual people. And and as we age, there are so many things that we as women, and I am an elder, I'm an elder as a sexologist, and I'm an elder in the world. I'm
Yes.
75, and I walk my talk, and I proudly claim my age to my audiences,
Yes.
because I want people to know that you can stay vital and juicy and be a sexual erotic being until the day they put you in the ground,
Absolutely.
or whatever you end up doing at the end of life, your last breath. And so aging is often looked at as the end of sex. I mean,
Mhm.
aging, I don't mean death, I mean aging. And
Right.
in fact, we have the right, and we have those of us who are trained and are willing to speak out, have the knowledge and the tools and techniques for keeping our erotic selves alive and our sexual expression ongoing. There's no
Mhm.
reason that we need to stop or should stop. In fact, sex is healthy. Sex is health, and
Yes.
pleasure is part of health. So I'm very much passionate, as you can hear, and an advocate for let's keep our sexual lives alive. I have a phrase called let's stay sexually alive,
Mm,
and I feel so strongly that there are remedies that we can bring into the bedroom, into our sex play alone and or with a partner, but there are many issues that women face as they're in an older phase of their lives, right?
mhm. Yes, absolutely. Well, and let's talk about that because I think it's confusing for a lot of people to think about um how to keep their erotic self, their sexual development alive when sexual function is changing, where, when the way their body feels is changing, or the type of response they're used to having that they have identified as this is who I am sexually, this is what sex feels like to me. And when that changes, there's a shift in identity.
Yes. Yes. So I have this phrase that I tell my couples, and that I utilize myself, and that is that expectations ruin relationships. So
Mhm.
get rid of them. Stop expecting, and stop expecting yourself at, let's say, 65 to be the way you were at 25
Yeah.
or at 35, 45, or 55. And we do know that there are sexual peaks. We do know that there are eras in which we are thriving, biologically speaking, because a lot of the resources that really allowed us to look at sexual peak, or what's the turning point for the decline. I hate to tell you, for males it's 40. Oh boy. And for women it's mm, later, much later.
Mm,
And so, when we think about being heterosexually connected, males and females, it's difficult, isn't it, if men are beginning to have their decline 15, 20 years earlier, but then women go through this charming period called the perimenopausal phase,
Yes.
which can wreak havoc for the individual and a relationship if she's in one. So I think that what's so important is accepting what is and knowing what is possible.
Yes.
And right, and like, there are so many kind of expressions that we in sexology use, and that Dr. Pattyisms, we call them at Sex
Mm,
Coach U, where
mm,
I train other people to do this kind of work. I feel so strongly that it all begins in the mind, that 90% of sex is actually between the ears, not
mhm.
between the legs. And when
Yes.
we shift our thinking and we shift our anticipation of joy and pleasure and all of the sensations that we can experience, we begin to be more comfortable about what may be, what is the possibility, because we're not that I've ever had a client who did, but we're not going to be, doing Cirque du Soleil acrobatics from a silk rope from 50 feet up above, hanging from the chandelier kind of metaphor.
Mhm.
And I never had a client, even in their 20s, who had sex in that extreme way. But there are concepts today that have to do with good enough sex.
Mhm.
So what is good enough sex? It's sex that for you is good enough so that you're experiencing connection, you're experiencing pleasure, you're experiencing a way of feeling good about yourself. Maybe you're
Mhm.
having orgasms, maybe you're not, but
Mhm.
it's good enough. And that gives a sense of peacefulness, doesn't it? Like there's a sense
Yes.
of accepting about that. But then there's optimal sex. And I just I just led a webinar before you and I started talking
Mm.
with an expert who came onto our platform at sexcoachu.com to talk about the psychology of flow and also about
Mm.
optimal sex, which one of my dear friends did a lot of the key research on, Dr. Peggy Kleinplatt. She actually has a book on optimal sex.
Mm.
And a lot of her people in that study were older people, and they weren't all functioning at a 10 out of 10.
Right.
But optimal is what's optimal for you. What
Right.
is the potential that
Right.
you have? And knowing that you're entitled to that. You're
Yes.
entitled to the pleasure, the connectivity, which is a word I prefer over connection, because
Mm.
don't you get the feeling like it's electric? Like there's an
Mhm.
electrical flow that allows me to feel my own sexuality and sexual energy flowing within me and toward you and in you and with us.
Right.
That's what I like to get my couples and my clients to begin to experience, to be that connected to themselves and their awareness and their knowingness, so that they can experience that electrical flow, which is what
Yes.
sex is. It's just energy in motion, actually.
Exactly. Exactly. Well, and there's so much satisfaction available in that connective flow that really has nothing to do with exactly what part goes where, right?
Exactly. Sex is actually the flow of our life force energy coursing through our bodies with
Yes.
all of the systems on go,
Yes.
and using those parts that are erogenizable, as in erogenous zones. And, for some people, it's the back of the knee or the back of their right ear down the neck.
Yeah.
And for others, it's their nipples or their areolas, or even their anus, what,
Mhm.
the not the buttocks, the anus. I mean,
Mhm.
whatever it is, if we can just accept the whole body is an erogenous zone, but it starts with the mind.
Yes.
And that's
Yes.
the most important component. And if we can add in that erotic, which is really the precursor to sex from my perspective, is the erotic
Yeah.
phase. And if we can open up erotic, and we can have anticipation, and we can have fantasy even about our beloved partner who may be sitting in
Mhm.
the recliner across the room. And that's that person's limitation, is that it
Mhm.
takes a lot for them to get out of the recliner. We can still fantasize about them, and even during sex, whether we're in the moment with someone we've been with for 40 years or 4 hours, we still are fantasizing in some ways because we're often out of the moment into what's next.
Mm,
That's the irony about sex, isn't it?
Yeah, it really is. I mean, gosh, there's so much there. I'm thinking about how for many folks, the idea of the erotic and eroticism as existing in our lives and in our bodies outside of the time where we're actively engaged in sex or flirtation, that thought is new for some people. And
Yes.
I think that is such a rich place to begin, as you said. Maybe you could say a little bit more about what cultivating eroticism in living looks like.
Well, I have a I was going to say, I was going to make a joke about it. But I have a tendency, and always have, I was sort of born this way, a la Lady Gaga, right? That I've always seen the world through this lens, which is why it was so perfect for me to become a sexologist, a specialist in sexuality, because I always saw arrows in the
Mm,
world, in nature. If you look at an iris, or you look at a lotus, or you look at any kind of flower or certain plants, or how nature flows, and there's so many incredible documentaries on cable TV and Netflix and all the rest of the platforms today that show some of these worlds, whether it's under the water or the the mycelial network.
yes.
What is it? The fabulous
Mycelium,
fungi.
yeah.
Oh my God,
Yes.
that's such an incredible documentary. But the world is alive, and it's responsive to us, and it's sexy. We
Hmm.
just have to open ourselves up to the fact that it's sexy. It's
Hmm.
got juiciness. It's got shapes and forms and textures. And so a lot of what I'm really talking about is the utilization of our senses to be fully alive, to be fully awake to the environment and the world around us. And we can consciously choose to open up the erotic channel. And
Hmm.
one way to do that is to watch or listen to, or even create your own erotic
Hmm.
stories. I've often had not recently, but in my repertoire of clients, I've had clients, and their assignment was to go home and write an erotic story when they come in sexually dead.
Mm,
And often that's been the key that's unlocked them. Or even in this era of electronic communication, sending an "I want you" text to your
mhm,
lover.
mhm.
That is eroticism in action. And I've often coached clients. I've had clients, I've gone through this conversation with many, many of my couples, where one of them will say to the other, "I want sex," because I coach them to ask for what they want, know what you want, know what you need, be
Yeah.
communicative with your partner, ask for it. And so to say, "I want sex now," is very different from saying, "I want you."
Yes.
I want you. That is so exciting and arousing for so many couples to hear that, to see that as a text, or, "Tonight I have a special surprise for you," or even just the idea of experimentation with new things, because we know that over time, a relationship has phases that it goes through. This is not aging. This is about the evolution, or in some ways the de-evolution, in relationship of our erotic and sexual interest in one another.
Mm,
And what we know is that over time we lose those lust cues, and we move to a more companionate love bond, simply put. And
mhm.
one way to get excited again and desirous for sex, especially with someone we're with for over the long term, is to add in surprise and variety, which re-sparks the dopamine receptors.
Yeah.
And that's where pleasure products come in. I mean,
Mhm.
there's so much out in the marketplace today, whether it's erotic movies, whether it's pleasure products, meaning a clitoral stimulator,
Mhm.
or a trigasm power tool, or anal beads, or CBD infused lubes. And by the way, when we age, one of the best things we can do for ourselves is to add a healthy lube.
Mhm.
And I'm a big fan of very healthy products. We have to be really careful as consumers today of things that don't contain harmful ingredients. I'm not going to get into all that today,
Right,
but
right.
these conscious decisions to open up our mind,
Yeah.
to open up our communication, to open up our sensory engagement and play. Sex is play, it's not work.
Mm,
It's play. And if we could access that kind of childlike being inside, we're all
mhm.
adults, I hope here, who
Yes.
have an inner child or maybe even an inner dorm of the different eras in which our child self emerged.
Yes.
And to just touch base with, what was your 11-year-old girl like? What was
Mm,
your 16-year-old girl like?
mm,
And that freedom that we had when we were young children, because we're free, we don't have the constraints that we learn to put on. We learn to put on the blinders and the muzzles as we learn to be in control, and
right,
that's where we lose it. So
right.
I'm about, let's free ourselves.
Absolutely. Well, and you're really speaking again to the point of sexual energy really being life force energy. Uh,
Absolutely.
Of course, obviously the way we play as children is different from the kind of play that happens in sex, but the energy of what play
Yes.
is universal and such a connective way to tap into that creativity within us, the curiosity, the unending potential for newness and discovery.
Absolutely. And play, there's there's a state we go into when we're in play where we're not in self-criticism.
Right.
And I think I actually think that the culprit that really stops most of us, particularly as women, is self-criticism, not so much criticism from others.
Hmm.
It's that unending loop of, you're not juicy enough, you're not thin enough, you're not
Right.
fat enough, your buttocks aren't fat enough. Oh,
Right.
God forbid, the Kardashian effect. Or I'm not having an orgasm quickly enough. This is one of the biggest myths that I think many, many, many women carry, which is that you're supposed to have an orgasm within seconds. And especially if you enjoy oral sex, oral genital or oral clitoral stimulation, which is what most women need,
Mm-hmm.
is clitoral stimulation to experience their orgasm. What happens is the women stop themselves. They go, oh, again, speaking heterosexually, it could be she, it could be he, it could be they, or non-binary.
Mm-hmm.
It's, oh, it's taking so long.
Right.
My partner doesn't want to keep doing that. They must be tired.
Right. Right.
It's so much work. I hear my clients say, it's like, excuse me. I think there's pleasure happening both sides of this
Yes.
equation.
Yes.
But that requires talking about it. And most people are more comfortable, quote, doing it than they are talking about sex. What do I
Absolutely.
want? What feels good? What's working? What doesn't feel good? What's not working? What don't I want? And that's so much the work of a sex coach or a clinical sexologist. It's
Mm-hmm.
helping people really define those boundaries and get to know yourself. Got to know yourself before you have great sex with somebody else.
Yes. Well, and to have, full and effective conversations about sex, you have to stay really present, which I think is something that,
Yeah.
as you said, and in people just doing sex, so to speak, um, you don't have to necessarily stay present for that, right? Like there's all sorts of ways to avoid thinking about or acknowledging or communicating what you feel, what you want, what you don't want. And in a conversation, that's a really different thing.
It is. And there's also something else that is a trend today, and that is coaching our clients to become embodied.
Hmm.
Most of us, one of my friends, Dr. Susan Kay, who is a somatic art specialist, she has this wonderful way that she defines the difference between somatic or body workers and talk only clinicians like myself. And that is neck up or neck down.
Mm,
And most of the burdens that men in particular carry are when they go neck up around erection and they think that they are having to do a performance
Mhm.
rather than having an experience of sex. And women do it around orgasm.
Mhm.
They feel like they're being evaluated for their performance. Did it, because often he'll say, did you come yet?
Right. Right.
and and it's like, oh my God. Because if
Right.
you try to have an orgasm, guess what?
Right.
You're
Well,
never
there's the
going to have
pressure.
one.
There's the expectations
You
that you
can't.
were
That's
speaking about at the beginning.
expectations.
Yeah.
Yeah, because trying to do anything means you're not doing it. So there is something so magical about getting out of neck up zone where
Yeah.
you're thinking, where you're worrying, where you're going through the laundry list. Are we done yet? Oh yeah, wait, I got to take the kids to soccer in about an hour. And
Mhm.
or my partner doesn't really want to be here.
Mm.
They're just doing this to keep this relationship going. Obligatory sex, the worst kind of sex, regardless of age. But
Mhm.
being present means to be fully conscious. And it really means, in terms of my looking at our sexual expression, being embodied,
Mhm.
getting out of the neck up zone into the body. The
Mhm.
body is where it lives.
Mhm.
And again, I said earlier, 90% of sex takes place between the ears and the mind realm, but really that's the realm that kicks it off.
Mm.
And if we stay stuck in thinking, we've left the body. And
Mhm.
that's really, I think that's the key to being successful at having a great sexual experience and or relationship, is knowing how to re-enter the body, which usually means breathing into it, stop the chatter,
Yeah.
take a deep breath, come back into you. Whew, it's mindfulness, it's consciousness, it's practice. And then just
Yeah.
feel your sensations. The term that I've come up with is called FOPS, FOPS. And I tell my clients, stop the worry, get out of the anxiety, come back into the body. And then I want you to FOPS it, focus on pleasurable sensations.
Mm.
Because when you take that masterful kind of like octopus mind that we all have, that's going a
Yeah.
million directions today with all the electronic interruptions we live with, and you pull it in and you take all those arms and tentacles and you put it inside the body, say, go search out, focusing on positive, pleasurable sensations. What does
Mm.
that feel like?
Mm.
And that's the secret to coming back into pleasure and into the body.
Yeah, and it is a practice. We do have to sort of train our minds. I mean, our minds are so powerful, right? We're talking about that all throughout this interview, and they also need our guidance and our direction to take us where we want to go. That's the focus on pleasure,
That's right. I say,
intentionally.
give it a job.
Yes.
Give your mind a job.
Yes.
Okay, your job right now is to go inside the body and look for pleasurable sensation. Oh, okay, I can do
I
that.
can do that.
Stop
Exactly.
criticizing that your boobs are too small, or one of them is hanging down, or your
Yeah.
your testicles are uneven, because most males are,
Yeah.
blah 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 blah. And
Yeah.
so it's this is really, it is a practice. And I think I don't talk about it that way very much, but it doesn't, when I get a client who has been in a relationship, especially older clients, obviously, they've lived a long life. They've been in relationship perhaps for many years,
Hmm.
and they come in because they're not happy sexually.
Yeah.
And they say, we don't know what to do. We've tried everything. Can you fix it? And I say, well, I can help you fix it. I don't have a
Right.
magic wand. Sorry. But also I say, it took 40 years for you to get to where you are
Mm.
today. It's going to take a little time to
Mhm.
unwind that ball of yarn and
Mhm.
restructure what's going to work for you and bring you the
Mhm.
joy you deserve, the
Mhm.
wholeness that you're looking for,
Yes.
and getting you into becoming fully who you can be as a sexual being, as a
Yes.
sexual person.
Mm. I love that. As we're speaking about all of this, I want to go back for a moment to the piece around, neck up and neck down, and, the experiences that we have from the neck up and the experience that we have from the neck down. And this is, connecting to a topic I was really excited to speak to you about, Dr. Patty, which is about birth, and birth as part of sexuality and our sexual expression. As a midwife, I have witnessed this hundreds of times. And not necessarily in the sense of, what we commonly identify as sexual pleasure or orgasm as part of birth, but the immense vitality that is part of birth. And birth, of course, being an experience that happens in the body, not in the mind. We don't figure out how to give birth with our mind. Our bodies know. And I just would love to hear your thoughts on that side of expansion into all different kinds of things and experience that our sexuality is and can be in other life experiences like birth.
Well, I think that we desexualize birth.
Yes.
And I think we desexualize a lot of things so that we feel comfortable and safe.
Right.
And I'm not an expert on orgasmic birthing. However, I remember I was a mother. I mean, I gave birth to a child who unfortunately is deceased.
I'm sorry.
And I remember writing about it. And it's so interesting. I rarely talk about myself, but I think this is so germane. I remember being someone who was, let's say I was 22, wasn't working in sexuality yet, but I was so aware of so many aspects of sexuality, and I feel like, and I've always been a writer and kind of had this very mystical spiritual bent to my whole life.
Yes.
And I remember writing a story about it and calling it an orgasmic birth, and not because it was an orgasm, but that what does orgasm really mean? And we have definitions. We have, evidence-based literature, and we talk about, the disengorgement of blood and the erectile bodies, spongy bodies. And now we know that we have a 3D clitoris, and it resides within the pelvic cavity, and we have a homologous organ to the male penis, which has two spongy bodies, yada, yada, yada. They fill with blood. And then orgasm is two things. It's the release and the disengorgement of blood. In other words, we swell with blood upon arousal.
Mm-hmm.
And then that swelling dissipates because we have a gush. Mm-hmm. And sometimes that gush is not a volcanic eruption, it's a hiccup, if at all, if it's palpable at all. But birth, no, you said it so beautifully. No mental interference stops this profound, powerful, primal event.
Mm-hmm.
It's not like, am I going to do it right? Is it taking too long? I mean, maybe when we're in agony, because birthing.
People definitely have those questions of, am I doing it right? Is it taking too long? It's very similar to conversations about other parts of our sexuality. Yes.
And there's something it's the sexual organs that are engaged, that are involved, that is what is happening. Right. The entryway is where pleasure and sex and all that randiness and eroticism and all that has the capacity to flourish and show up. And yet it's also, procreatively speaking, the vehicle for insemination and then conception and then yada, yada, yada. Then out comes a baby 9 months later and emitted through that same canal. So it's similar to women and postpartum who are breastfeeding. It's a similar analogy in that I've had many female clients who are like, well, my breasts used to be very sexually a part of my arousal. They were an erogenous zone for me and my partner, but I'm breastfeeding and now I've shut them off.
Yeah,
I've turned off turned the switch off, and now I'm a mommy, and they're milk machines. I can't have them also be erotic zones. Right. Well, yes, you can. Mm-hmm. So how do you manage that is another conversation. And I think that is similar. And I think that the exquisite nature of what orgasm actually is that it is, I consider it sacred.
Yes.
I consider it a sacred, a holy moment or series of moments when we truly transcend, when we truly let go, when we break through that shell of form and become sheer energy. We know that in French, it's le petit mort, the little death. We know that we go, there's a where we like lose consciousness if we're lucky. And we even can with a partner and with ourselves as well. It's easier to really talk about it with a partner. We can merge. We have that feeling of oneness, of unity, of merging, because we've let go, we've released, and we hold on to ourselves so tightly as human beings walking around, as human doings. Very few of us live our lives as human beings. Most of us live as human doings. And so birth really, there's a word I'm searching for. It takes it is a transcendence. We're being used as a vehicle, and there is something so incredibly poignant and sacred about a human being, a human life coming through your body that brings us into this exquisiteness. And so it's also pain becomes pleasure. It's the riding of that edge. In BDSM play, kinky play, there's a lot of talk around this edge of producing pain releases endorphins, which equates to pleasure and ecstasy. So that now we're in another zone talking about this, which is that just as in someone who enjoys severe or extreme sensory play, like flogging or whipping or caning or whatever they're into consensually, this orgasmic birth has the same capability, doesn't it, of taking us from the excruciating, I gave birth. I had no pills, no epidurals, no nothing. I had there was a machine administering gas and it didn't work. It was a very rural hospital. So it was really a natural childbirth without any preparation. And it hurts. It's excruciating pain that when you enter the pain, now this is the conscious journey of it. When you enter the pain, you come out the other end into ecstasy. So all of these layers are happening as an orgasmic birth, and they're all available if you're conscious to it, if you allow it. And that's something that we rarely talk about.
Yes, absolutely. And birth can be an altered state. And I think that is, that's partly a function of the hormones that are going on, endorphins, oxytocin, all these things that are happening. And the brain waves change as our primal mechanisms in the body take over, and our prefrontal cortex is no longer,
it's
offline.
So
alert and driving the bus. And so we can enter this altered state where we really are touching into the essential energy that you're speaking about, and the liminal space where maybe we remove value judgments from words or sensations, particularly around pain. Pain in childbirth, I think, it makes sense on a certain level. Sometimes I feel like I get in trouble as a as a home birth midwife for saying this. The natural birth world is very geared towards reframing or eliminating pain. And I think that, it makes sense. There's a huge experience going on in the body. So it's normal that there are intense sensations and things we've never felt before. And it's a lot to wrap our minds and our bodies around. But if we can let go of this value judgment of, I am feeling something that's really big, or maybe I'm feeling pain and it's excruciating, to not tell a story of that means something's wrong, that means I am bad, that means I can't do this, that, all of those things that we associate with it really takes us back to that place of letting go of expectations and allowing the body to do what the body does, and allowing the spirit of our vitality and, just the incredible potential in our sexual energy that is what creates life, on a literal sense of creating babies and birthing babies, and also just on a life force energy level.
I totally agree. And I think that the idea that we can actually look at pain as the gateway to transformation into
Mhm.
ecstasy is what I would prefer to look at it as. And
Mhm.
that's what you're saying. And this idea of pain reduction, pain elimination, to me, that's not natural birth. That's a
Mhm.
medicated birth. And I have
Mhm.
no bias. I mean, if somebody wants to be numbed out or put out or whatever, fine. There is something different that occurs in this hyper ecstatic, hyper conscious, hypersensory state
Mhm.
that nothing can equal.
Mhm.
Nothing. And
Mhm.
that's why I wish I could find what I wrote a long time ago. It's gone. It's not like it was on a computer file or a hard drive
Right.
somewhere. It was handwritten on a piece of paper. Um, but there's a there's a bad rap given to the pain, and there isn't
Yes.
enough honoring of
Yes.
this as an ecstatic journey into something magnificent and magical and,
Yes.
again, sacred.
Exactly.
And I teach
Exactly.
my
Yeah.
couples, it doesn't mean they all hear me or want to hear this, that I say to them something like, so let's talk about sex for a minute. Let's talk about intercourse for a minute. So you're going to take your body part called a penis and put it inside her body part called a vagina. The vulva is, the whole thing, but we're talking
Mhm.
about the vagina, the canal. Isn't that like rather powerful? Think about that.
Mhm.
Like you're putting a body part inside another human's body. That's a big
Mhm.
deal.
Yes.
So let's
Yes.
start looking at it as a big deal
Yeah.
and honoring it and saying it and feeling that. And that shifts sex out of the bad, dirty, wrong, smarmy, whatever, to this incredibly sacred. That word is coming in again as I speak, but something on a more spiritual level that up levels it vibrationally.
Mm.
And that's really, birthing is a high vibration experience. So
Yes.
is deathing. Having been present for the death of my daughter was also, I know weren't going to talk about this, but it was also a holy experience, an
Mm.
ecstatic experience. I was totally devastated that she was dying. She had
Yeah.
AIDS for 20 years and made it
Wow.
20 years.
Wow.
And I was there in the AIDS hospice in Los Angeles holding her hand as she took her last breath.
Mm.
And it was a holy moment.
Yeah.
And I was aware of it. And I got it all.
Yeah.
And so this is about the reverence of life. And that's really what we're talking about. And
Yes.
so all of these negative ideas and all the restrictions, and let's limit a woman's right to choose, and
Yeah.
let's talk about, all the bad stuff about sex. No, let's reframe this all.
Yeah.
And let's really elevate it to what it truly is.
Yeah.
And I'm not talking about the ecstasy of pleasure. And I had 40 orgasms this time with, my partner or my
Right.
vibrator. I'm really talking about how we hold it in our minds and in our own hearts and in our own spirits, how we regard this. That's really what I would like to leave all of you listening to take in.
Yes. Oh, thank you for that, Dr. Patty. That's exactly, yeah, I feel totally aligned to that message. And that is really what is underneath all of this.
Yeah.
All of the work that I'm doing, all of the work that you're doing, and everyone who's participating in the summit and everyone who's listening. This is
Yeah.
um we've tapped into that, the underneath, the root. What is this really all about? So thank you so much
Yeah.
for going there with me and bringing our listeners to that and just bringing that essence to this conversation.
Thank you for letting me. It's sort of like the Sexual Mycelial Network, right? You people all have to go see this documentary on mushrooms. I'm telling you.
Yeah, I watched it. It was incredible.
Yeah,
Absolutely.
yeah. Changed my world, my view of the world, actually.
Yes. All right. So, gosh, I could just keep going forever, Dr. Patty, but I know that you have a gift that you are offering to listeners that want to go further and keep up with your work. Would you share with us what that is?
Yes. So I have a newsletter that comes out seasonally, and that's something that I hope you all will take advantage of at my website at drpattybritton.com. And I have a gift for you, which is an ebook on female sexual pleasure. It's called For Her Pleasure. And I actually wrote it many years ago, and it's an interactive ebook. It's fun. You can do some activities in it, giving a view from having made, it's so funny, we're talking about this today. I made a 3-part series as DVDs about a modern interpretation of the ancient teachings of the Kama Sutra. And DVD number 2 was called For Her Pleasure. And I was inspired to take that concept of, get her pleasure first, then you can have yours, which is also She Comes First, Ian Kierner's very famous book now, and a way of looking at partner sex. And it comes from a quasi-spiritual point of view. I don't lay my values on anybody. If spirituality is something you're interested in, or the sacred aspects of sexual expression or being sexual, that's wonderful. Then you're in alignment with what we're talking about. If you're not, I have many clients who are like, oh, don't talk about that. Let's talk about my erection.
Yes.
Or my testosterone reading. I go, sure, it's fine. But that book is called For Her Pleasure, and it's available as a free gift. And I think you'll all enjoy it and have some fun with it and maybe learn something.
Yes. Wonderful. Thank you. Thank you so much, Dr. Patty. What a rich conversation.
That's great.
Really appreciate you being here.
Thank you. I really enjoyed talking with you. This is a wonderful summit.
Oh, thank you so much. And to all of our listeners, thank you for being here and listening and participating. And I will see you next time. Thanks for being here with us today, unlocking the path to your fullest sexual health, wellness, and expression. More sessions will be delivered to your inbox tomorrow, so keep an eye out for that. And remember, you have access for a full 7 days after each interview is released, or you can get lifetime access plus a private coaching session with me, my Body Wisdom guided meditation, and your set of affirmations for sexual healing and empowerment by becoming a VIP using the link in any of our daily emails or by emailing support@redwoodmidwifery.com. I look forward to being here with you again in our next session. And until then, may your deepest desire guide you home.